Sunday at 1 o'clock. And the craft show party, for those who participated in the craft show, is the Saturday, the 17th. There's information in the newsletter on what to bring. If you're a newcomer this morning, I'm nervous. Having a celebrity here. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome all. We especially like to welcome first-time visitors. We hope you'll join us for coffee, which will be in the terrace room. In between, if you can find space in there, we set up with a lot of tables, as you can see, so there is coffee out. I invite you to stop at the welcome table if you didn't already do it in the Great Hall. You can fill out a card to request our newsletter, answer any questions you might have about the Morris Family Unitarian Fellowship. Please browse at the book table in the library, it's always changing, and look at the partner table alongside of it, our congregation in Transylvania, where our tradition has its roots. I want to make sure you know that the children come to the 9 o'clock service for the first 15 minutes, and then they have religious education upstairs. Members, please look for visitors with name tags. There'll be a lot of them today, so you'll be busy saying hello to all the visitors we have. We're here to hear Mr. Sinkford. I'm glad you chose to be here this morning. I hope you'll come back often so you can experience the full range of our Sunday services. This fellowship has a strong tradition of shared ministry. This year's programs are created in partnership among our interim minister, the Reverend Barbara Child, the program committee, and other members of the congregation. Thank you all for coming.
Article 36 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association.
Power of thought, which cannot be sold or to this special day in this place. Now, we do know that United Nations Day is really October 25th. But at the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship, today is UN Day. And I believe that it's the perfect day for it. It's the first Sunday of the new year, after a year of terrible divisions and war. In UN Secretary Kofi Annan's holiday message this year, he said, "This year must be different. It must be the year we turn the tide." Kofi Annan lifts up universal values, nonviolence, respect for life, tolerance, equal rights. These are values we lift up as well. And we need to lift them up in times like these, when the UN is under attack by those who say that they act in our name and that they would protect us. We need the UN, and it needs us, perhaps like never before. So I'm very glad that this is UN Day here. I'm delighted to welcome our many guests and honored that with this congregation, in a few moments, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association will lift up his own religious voice in this place, for he has truly distinguished himself in his partnering on our behalf with international and interfaith communities, living out a devoted commitment to help the world move to wholeness. So welcome to this special day in this gathered community, as together in a diverse world, we make a community. Let us sing together number 318. We will be one.
You Good morning, Madam Chair, Sinkford, and it's my pleasure to serve this congregation as the Director of Religious Education for Children and Youth. We've gathered here as a community of many ages to affirm the values we offer our children and youth, to honor those who teach them, and to celebrate our mutual commitment to raising our children. I invite you to join me in stating the affirmations printed in your order of business. May we treat all people kindly, because they are our brothers and sisters. May we take good care of the earth, because it is our home. May we live lives full of goodness and love, because that is how we will become the best men and women we can be.
Would the children please come down front? Good morning. Have you ever heard of somebody saying, this is a historic day? This day will go down in history. Yes, you've heard that. I want you to know that later on, when you get older, you will be able to remember this day. And you will be able to say, I was there on the day that made history. It was the day when the president of our whole denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, came to visit us at the Morristown Unitarian Division. And here he is. This is the Reverend William Sinkford. And I know something about him, which is that he loves to tell stories. And what an audience you have today. So I'm going to hand this to you.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's a real privilege for me to be here with you. And Barbara's right, I do love to tell stories, and I thought I would share one of my favorites with you. It's actually a story that comes from the Bible. You all know what the Bible is, right? You have a good religious education program here. Just thought I'd check. So the story is about the Israelites, the people who were in slavery in Egypt. And they left Egypt, they escaped from slavery and wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Now, they only traveled about 150 miles, and why it took them 40 years to make that journey, we're not quite clear. But they finally, after 40 years, came to the place that their God had promised them would be a land of milk and honey. And it was across the river, the Jordan River. And they expected that they would just be able to enter this new land, this land of milk and honey, and receive all of the bounty of the land. But as they looked across the river, there was this huge walled city, and it was named Jericho, and it was well defended. And they weren't sure exactly what they were supposed to do. If there were people there, and they were defending their land, how were they supposed to move into this land of milk and honey? Well, they were in a leadership transition, just like this congregation. And their new leader, whose name was Joshua, did what the leaders of the Israelites always did when they had a problem. he went up to the top of the mountain and he prayed. He asked his God what they should do. And when he came back down, he said, God has given me a plan. Now, the plan didn't involve any airstrikes or submachine guns or cruise missiles. That was not God's plan. Here was the plan. The plan was for the Israelites to cross the river, and on each of 7 days, they were supposed to walk around the city of Jericho and speak out and sing. And on the 7th day, they were supposed to do this 7 times, and their God promised them that the walls of Jericho would come tumbling down if they did this. Well, the people were a little uncertain, but they said, well, if God tells us to do this, we're going to do it. And so they did. For 7 days, they marched around the city. And on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times, and they spoke out, and they sang. And the story goes that the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Now, you know a little bit about the archaeology of Jericho. And there actually was a city of Jericho, there still is. And actually, the walls did come tumbling down. I'm not sure whether it was an act of God or an earthquake. We just don't know. But the walls did come tumbling down. One of the reasons that I like this story is that it has something to say about what can happen when people are willing to march and speak out. And so I have a question. Do you know of another time when walls have come tumbling down as a result of people marching and speaking out? Anybody? Yeah? Nobody? Well, let me make a suggestion to you. I'm going to suggest that after church this afternoon, you ask your parents if they know any time of people marching and speaking out has caused walls to come tumbling down, and see what they have to say. Yes?
I do know about a time, well, my daddy told me this, that one time when there was a war, the soldiers were marching across the bridge, and they were making too much noise and it collapsed.
Too much fun. You may be surprised that your parents have other stories. That's very good. So it's a pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
And now, it's our pleasure to do us off to class.
Over the years, Unitarian Universalists have found many wonderful things to say about our most widely revered symbol, the flaming chalice. But most of those things are about the flame. As I light our chalice this morning, I invoke the wisdom of God Marshall, the Second Secretary General of the United Nations. He had something wonderful to say about the chalice. He said every morning we must hold out the chalice of our own being to receive, to carry, and to give back. come now to the time in our service that we share with most all Unitarian Universalist congregations across the world. A time of sharing joys and concerns, joys and sorrows. I want to begin this morning by bringing you word from our good friend Jerry Sill, who has asked me to tell you that she would welcome visits. And I would like to suggest that if you are thinking of visiting, that you might come and speak with me, and I can tell you about times and directions and so on. I think of this time as the time when we keep vigil for one another, for those among us who have had some particular milestone, joy or sorrow in the past week, that it is important for you to share with the whole congregation. If what you have to share is not quite that, you could honor this time by keeping silent. I will light a candle for you as you speak. You can find something to share, and you could come to this microphone if you choose, and if not, Joe could bring the other microphone to you.
I'm Elizabeth Bain, and on Wednesday I worked my last day, and I am now retired. But don't think that you can ask me to do everything.
When I sat down next to Pat Stover and Bob Scott today, I was reminded that they were moving away from us, and I was sad to know that Bob is leaving shortly to drive down the Research Triangle. But I think it's both a joy and a concern. The concern is that we're going to lose such two fine people from our congregation, the joys that we've had for as long as we have.
Not Bob Scott, it's Bob Franklin.
Bob Franklin. I apologize to Bob Scott.
Let us prepare then to be silent together, knowing that for all we have heard, many more joys than sorrows are contained in silence. Let us grow silent with these earlier words from Dr. Scholl. Life only demands from you the strength that you possess. Only 1 feat is possible, not to have run away. Let us be silent. What a gift that we can receive only in silent communion with one another. Let us be grateful. In this spirit we have gathered. In this spirit may we carry on. So may it ever be.
morning again. And once again, a very warm welcome on this very special day on UN Sunday, dedicated to the extraordinary work of the UN and our own Unitarian Universalist United Nations office. We're especially honored that Reverend Bill Sinkford is with us today. Just like to mention briefly some of the major topics recommended by the UUUNO for study and action: rebuilding Iraq, dialogue with Islam, peace building, international criminal court, Security Council reform, and human rights. We're convinced that the acquisition of deep knowledge and understanding can create necessary qualities for empowerment for change. One of our most important initiatives is our intern program. College students interested in the UN and a better world work at the office completely voluntarily without pay. Our own Dan Kuntz, who chose to spend a year at the office between high school and college, will present a brief summary of his experience. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Ben Kuntz, and I'm an intern at the UUUNO. Whenever I tell someone that I'm working at the UUUNO, I met with an onslaught of questions. Do you like it? How did you find out about it? Do you really get to go into the UN? And of course, what exactly do you do there? Trying to explain what I do at the UUUNO is much like trying to explain what exactly a Unitarian Universe believes in. It's simply impossible, yet I try. As an intern, I perform a variety of functions. However varied my job has been as an intern, I have accomplished a great deal. First, I have begun the transformation of the UUUNO website from being non-functional to fully interactive with a message board, new content, and very soon, online registration for the spring seminar. In addition, I have lectured about the UUUNO to the Groveville UU Church Society of Friends. I am also helping in the design and application of our programs, including our upcoming spring seminar on human rights, and 5 programs which will be presented at the General Assembly this June. An equally important segment of my internship has focused on independent research. My research is centered on the reactions of governments with the introduction of a third-party peace plan called the Geneva Accord. Part of my work, a critical review of the Geneva Accord, has been published in the winter edition of the UUUNO publication, Windows on the World. Currently, there are 3 interns at the UUUNO. One other intern, Mark Arnell, has also had a large impact on the UUUNO. He has helped to spearhead the formation of a faith-based, non-governmental organization alliance on UN reform, and has represented the UUA and the UUUNO in conferences at both West Point and Belgium. My experience at the UUUNO is invaluable to me and has helped set the course and decide on the direction I will take in my life. I only wish everyone had the chance to be able to do what I am doing now. Most importantly, I would like to thank everyone here who is a member of the UUUNO. Your contributions make an enormous difference to the UUUNO and to me as an intern. Thank you.
I think you can realize how important the young people are to us. And thanks, Ben, for your dedication and service in the name of peace, justice, and world community. Now please take a look at the UUUNO membership folder and envelope in the order of service. As you may know, our UN office is financed entirely by individual and congregational contributions. This is your opportunity to lend your support. If you're writing checks, please make them payable to the UUUNO. All amounts will be most graciously accepted. The offering will now be received.
Everyone is entitled in all the rights and freedoms set forth in this Declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status.
Your rights do not know the color of your skin, or if you are a man or a woman. Your rights do not know what language you are speaking, or what God you have chosen to listen to your praying. Your rights do not know how you will vote, or what you may have spoken or thought, or the history of the place where you live, or what caste or family you may have, or how much money you own, or how many acres, or what you think about yourself and your neighbors. It is only of themselves that your rights know, and they know that they belong to you. Someday your human rights may call you like a voice in your ear, and then you will decide what manner of person you are. Your rights will live within you and never depart. They will live in the chambers of your heart. Your rights will rest in the hollow of your hand, in the light of your eyes, in the dancing of your mind, and in the time of ease and the time of trouble, in the safety and the love around your table.
Article 22. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks.
In your household empty hour, they came and looked with you not there. The heart that warmed your family, they buried beneath a cold dead eye. They listened to your telephone and took your pictures, every one. Your honor cast out in the street, your reputation maimed and cut. They made their own instrument to follow you wherever you went. They bound and took you in a car. Your neighbors don't know where you are. Now where they hold you in your cell, there is but one thing left to tell. Though they put out all the lights, they do not own your human rights. In the darkness where you are, your rights are shining like a star.
What a privilege it is for me to be here with you this morning. I want to thank you all for inviting me to share worship with you. The reading I'd like to offer is from another piece on the United Nations. It's from our hymnal. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, to ensure that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, to employ international machinery in the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims from the Charter of the United Nations. Will you please rise as willing and able and join in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. Let me begin by bringing you greetings from the larger family of faith of which this congregation is one part. The Unitarian Universalist Association is nothing more than the coming together of now more than 1,000 free, liberal religious congregations across North America. We come together for a variety of reasons, primarily to provide services and support to individual congregations, but also, and increasingly, to raise a liberal religious voice in the larger world. I'm particularly happy to be here in this period of leadership transition, which I mentioned in the story for the children. I'm delighted that you're taking the time here in Morristown to do a thorough examination of your imagination for what your ministry in this community needs to be. And I applaud that work. I also applaud the fact that the congregation remains healthy, both in terms of its spirit and in terms of its finances in this period of transition. And I'm particularly grateful to be here to be in the presence of those who have contributed so much, not only to this congregation, but also to the larger family of faith, to Unitarian Universalism. I'm talking about people like Eleanor and the work of the UUU and all of us. I'm talking about the early participation of this congregation in the Partner Church program. And I want to particularly hold up the work that Jan and Stu Sendell have done on behalf of the association. The contributions of members of this congregation to the larger family of faith have been critically important to what we have been able to do in the wider world, and our voice is critically important in these troubled times. So thank you all for all that you do. The reality is that Unitarian Universalism is a vital and vibrant faith today. We've been growing in numbers in each of the last 20 years. That makes some of our close cousins in the Protestant world quite green with envy. Their trajectory has been quite different. But far more important than our growth in numbers is our increasing willingness to claim the good news of this faith, to claim the value that we find in our congregational life, and to begin to be willing to share that good news out in the wider community, which needs it so badly. Our public voice has, I believe, never been more present and effective, and it shows up as a voice for hope and a voice of sanity in a world which often seems to be going insane. Unitarian Universalism is no longer on the margins of the congregation, of the conversation. We're willing to move in from the margins toward the center of the conversation in the public square and offer what we have lived and learned to those outside our sanctuary walls. In December, just before Christmas, I had the opportunity to travel to Rome, to the Vatican, actually, to meet with a group called Religions for Peace. This is an institution that Unitarian Universalism helped to found in the 1960s. It's a group which is working hard on interfaith collaborations and conversations around the world. Last May, I was in Amman, Jordan, where that institution called together religious leaders from Iran, all of them, to create an interreligious council which is still functioning today, trying to help that society move toward health and wholeness. And in Rome, I had the privilege of hearing the two crafters of the Geneva Accords, which were mentioned earlier, and hear them dialogue with one another, trying to find an imagination which would help the Holy Land move toward health and wholeness. There are signs of hope in this world today, and Unitarian Universalism is a part of the conversations which I believe lead in that direction. While I was at the Vatican, we had a private tour of the Sistine Chapel and had the opportunity of seeing Michelangelo's Last Judgment at the end of that hall. Perhaps some of you have made that pilgrimage as well. And I was standing next to another person from the United States who was looking at the Last Judgment and noting a couple of things. First, he said, well, look down at the bottom there's this image of hell. And the two figures in the image looked a lot like Africans, son of a gun. Now, they were not true human figures. They had different toes and hands, but these were Africans. And that was the image of hell, the image of evil, of bestiality, which was portrayed in the 15th century by Michelangelo. And the other thing this person pointed out to me was that the picture of Jesus, who of course is prominent in peace, that you would expect that, of course, is actually blonde and blue-eyed. And the person standing next to me said, "Isn't that strange? When Jesus was from Palestine, he was what we know as an Arab. He was clearly not blonde and blue-eyed." So I had the chance to give one of my standard riffs to say to him that the image of Jesus actually changed dramatically right at about the time that Michelangelo was painting. Up until about the time of 1450 or 1475, Jesus was portrayed as an Arab. Dark, often curly hair, brown eyes, dark skin. But as Europe encountered the rest of the world, the voyages of discovery, and encountered the native peoples here in the Western Hemisphere, and increasingly encountered Africa through the slave trade, in a period of about 25 years, the images of Jesus experienced a dramatic change from dark skin, black hair, dark eyes, to white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. It was an amazing transformation. Some of you may know the song that I learned as a child before I became a Unitarian Universalist. It goes, "Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world." It's a phrase which has been moving around my consciousness for many years, but particularly so since that trip from Rome and since the questions that the other American asked me. Race is one of those complicated issues that we know we have to address, and we know that we actually don't address it very well. But I'm going to offer a few thoughts this morning to you on the subject. It's a complicated topic, and I don't pretend to have all of the answers far from it, but I do think there are some questions that can be asked. About 6 weeks ago, the Boston Globe ran a lead article which was titled, "Bias Taxes Brain, Research Finds." The lead in the story said, and I quote, "To the litany of arguments against prejudice Scientists are now adding a new one. Racism can make you stupid. Now, that's a lead to warm the heart of every Christmas, but what the research found, and it was conducted at Dartmouth, among Dartmouth students, was that even among those well-educated folks, the struggle not to think inappropriate, politically incorrect, racist thoughts, and I quote again, exhausts the part of the brain in charge of executive control, leaving it temporarily unable to perform well at other tasks. Racism can make you stupid. It's a sobering kind of comment on the state of race relations in this country today. And I know that most of you don't need reminding of that. But it's good to hear some research which doesn't merely condemn the Bible-thumping, low educational level poor folks, but talks about us, even those folks who are well-educated and believe that we're enlightened, can be tripped up by our difficulty in dealing with issues of race and racism. You see, many of us would like to think that we're pretty well finished with racism as a topic. Our culture has succeeded in vilifying the worst, the most blatant racist views, and many of us are convinced that racism is actually a thing of the past. Many of us have also convinced ourselves that we don't think about race at all. We're kind of a colorblind society. We're happy with the demographic changes that are taking place. At least that's what we like to tell ourselves. But as Howard University law professor Frank Wu said in a talk he gave at our General Assembly in Boston last year, as a nation, we are actually obsessed with race, even or especially because we don't realize that that's what we're thinking about. And apparently, that reality can make us stupid. And I can't help but think that the reality is that this is going to get more complicated before it gets easier for us. The reality is that our society is becoming the most racially, culturally, and religiously diverse society the earth has ever known. And the further out we move from our strictly segregated past, that black and white past that we have found some pretty good ways to talk about, the further love has actually blurred the rigid boundaries between red and yellow, black and white. Love across the racial divides has been legal in this country, and many of you were around, I certainly was, only since 1967. It was a Supreme Court decision appropriately entitled Loving versus Virginia. Interracial marriage legal across the country. Now, since that time, in-migration to this country has radically changed who we are. At that point in time, and certainly it was true when I was coming up, we really did live in a pretty much black and white world. But since that time, in-migration has shifted that so that the world is now a part of who we are. The world is now a part of who we are. And the fact that we've spent so much time trying to figure out how to deal with black and white issues has actually not prepared us very well for the reality that it's no longer a black and white world, that there are people from all over the world who are a part of us. About a year ago, I moved from Newton, which is a near suburb of Boston, into downtown Boston. It has some advantages for me. I can walk to my office, and I love that. But we live about a block from the gates to Chinatown. And I took a young person there to dim sum. Do any of you know something? I see some heads nodding. Tender morsel. It's a wonderful meal. To dim sum at one of the many Chinese restaurants in Chinatown. And we were sitting there, and this young woman, aged about 14, looked around and she said, well, why aren't there any Americans in this restaurant? And I responded by saying that my hunch was that everyone who was sitting in the restaurant was an American citizen, and the fact that they didn't look like her, she's a white young woman, really didn't have anything to do with who was American. We don't have good ways yet to think about the diversity, the pluralism in which we are living. Take my family as an example. of what's should be. Now, I'm an African American. That's typically how I describe myself. But if you look at my skin color, it should be apparent to all of you that my heritage is not all from Africa. I got to be this color both as a result of violence, because that was a part of black and white, but also as a result of what passed for love across the racial divide in this country. Both violence and love. And it's become even more complicated for my kids. You know, when I was coming up, we wanted to be called Negroes. That was the official term. We were called a lot of other things. Some of you will remember that. And then I became black after I was Negro for a while. And then I became African American when I stopped being black. And now actually I find myself using the term black more and more just because it seems simple. I see at least one head nodding in the audience. It's a complicated thing, but for my kids, even though I have become accustomed to dealing with those labels, my children, who are the product of a marriage between me, a light-skinned African American, and an Irish white woman, it's even more complicated for them. So my 22-year-old son, when asked what his race is, says, well, you know, I'm a product of a marriage between a light-skinned African. He gives the whole story. And he doesn't go to African American or black. My daughter, who's now 19, it doesn't need to be pushed quite so hard in terms of describing herself. She goes to biracial quite quickly as the descriptor. But even for her, some of the categories that we use really don't work anymore. And it's particularly true, and I'm delighted to see the folks from the youth group here, it's particularly true for those who are younger than my generation, who are growing up in a world where diversity is a reality, it's not a theory, and where identity tends to be specific rather than by category. Now, I had the opportunity about 2 months ago to return to my family roots, going down to a small town in western North Carolina, a town which, when I lived, there was about 2,500 folks, and research my family history, going through the census records. And it was a fascinating experience as the family moved from pre-Civil War time, when, of course, the designation was just a number of slaves who were a part of the household, to 1870, when the former slaves were listed as domestics in the census records. Now, the reality is that the woman who was listed as a domestic in my family was actually a former slave of the owner, and she, in fact, with that slave owner, fathered the family that is now mine. But she was listed as a domestic, and then you move up until to 1900, and my family was listed not as slave or black, but as mulatto. We kind of recognized that some additional language needed to be developed. The reality is that racial and cultural identity is becoming so complex that we don't have a clue about how to deal with it. In 1973, the U.S. Census listed 5 possible racial categories and asked us, American citizens, to identify which category we fell into. That was fine back then, apparently, although it required some force fit for some of us. By 2000, the number of categories to describe race had tripled, and combinations were possible, so that there were 63 possible designations in the U.S. Census for race and cultural identity. One theory is that by the time of the 2010 census, the U.S. government will have to stop asking about race and cultural identity because the number of permutations will be too many for even the Census Department to track. Too many for them to track. Now, the reality that we're living in such a pluralistic society can be a source of great confusion for some of us, and of great richness. But for different identity-based groups, the new situation is also complex. traditional civil rights organizations, for example, worry that the multiracial movement is diluting their impact on politics, and perhaps, indeed, it is. And they worry that the movement in some parts of this country to stop categorizing people by race at all will jeopardize their ability to continue to track and counter the effects of discrimination in this country. And what about for the nation as a whole? What do these trends mean for where we're headed as a society in terms of the way we deal with race? One census official suggested that as the classification system gets fuzzier and blurrier, we're going to have to recreate ourselves as a society without using a set of social policies that are based on race. Now, there's some problems with that. Because although we like to think of ourselves at our best as a colorblind society that has moved beyond race and racism, the reality is that racism still operates. So that an African American person who kills a white person is 22 times more likely to receive a death sentence than an African American who kills an African American. A third of the young African American men in this country are engaged, involved in the control of the criminal justice system, either in jail, on parole, or in supervision. We are raising a generation of young African American and Latino men particularly, whose primary experience of civil society is the criminal justice system. And that cannot be a hopeful sign for our culture. So the operation of racism still exists, but we like to think that we are above it. It's a real dilemma for us, and we need to develop some additional capacity, some additional skills to deal with it. The Unitarian Universalist Association has committed itself to working on this issue. We have been actually hard at work for the last 10 years and at work for the last 20, hoping to create Unitarian Universalism as a truly anti-racist, multicultural faith community. But it's complicated work because we began where perhaps we needed to begin, which was with the issues of black and white. And we developed some pretty good language around how to deal with that and to understand how oppression on that divide operates, but we haven't yet figured out how to talk about, deal with, or internally process the reality of real racial and cultural diversity and pluralism. We don't yet have the capacity. And it's felt a lot like we've been stuck. The most frequently asked question that I get when I'm traveling around is not about the health and growth of Unitarian Universalism. It's not about our spiritual center. It's not about how we describe our faith. It's how can we become more diverse as a faith community? And my response, and I had to develop one, whereas my response is actually quite uniform, which is to say that as long as Unitarian Universalism is a primarily white, European, American community, we will not be able to engage with the world until we develop some additional capacity. And the worst thing we can do is to try to go out and find a few more dark faces so that the white Unitarian Universalists will feel better about themselves. That's not a spiritually grounded approach for us. What we need to begin doing is showing up as allies to traditionally marginalized communities and trust that the good news of this faith is powerful enough, is needed enough, so that members of those communities, like members of the European American community, will come and check us out. And some proportion of them will find a welcome home here. But it will not be an evangelical approach to go out and find more African American or Latino or Asian folks so that we can feel better about who we are. Racism is complicated. Part of what we need to do is to understand our own history. We like to be very proud and talk about Theodore Parker preaching with a gun in his pulpit as runaway slaves came into the congregation, done there so that if the police came to take them back and send them back into slavery, you could defend them. We'd like to talk about that. We have a more complicated history. Our congregation in Brewster, Massachusetts, which is on Cape Cod, is a fabulous congregation. It's a town of 20,000 people with a UU congregation of 800 members. Very impressive. In the fellowship hall, there are pictures of sailing ships, many of them. And members of the congregation, as they were going through a process much like you're doing now, in terms of trying, we're looking at these pictures, and someone finally had the courage or the intelligence, got a little bit less stupid, to ask what might have been in the sailing ships, the prophet from which built this wonderful church. And the congregation was willing to take on the issue. And they did research, and it turns out that of the ships pictured, none of them actually carried slaves, but that all of the owners of the ships were deeply involved in what was called the triangle trade, and that the money that built that beautiful sanctuary actually came from the slave trade. Now, they didn't do this in an attempt to beat themselves up, but they did it in an attempt to actually know their own history, to know their own history, so that they wouldn't try to move forward on a shaky foundation. We need to know our own history as a religious community so that we can more effectively and honestly deal with the world that we are creating. It's a little bit difficult to try to lay out a program for Unitarian Universalism around issues of race and culture. We know the diversity in the world around us. We know, at least we're beginning to know, that red and yellow, black and white doesn't adequately capture identity in the current time. But one of the things that we're lacking is both a sense of our own history, a reality of our own history, and a willingness to have a better, more honest conversation. A willingness to have a conversation where we don't allow stupidity to rule, where we're willing to hear the specifics of individual story. A conversation where it's not impossible to say something that's politically incorrect for fear that you'll be beaten up for it. A conversation where we can actually bring all of ourselves to the table. And it's also true that I think what we need to do is to find ways to move into more effective partnerships outside of our sanctuary walls. Partnerships that will bring us into relationship with marginalized communities. Partnerships which can help lead us to greater spiritual depth. You see, we have some theological resources. The reality that we live as a religiously pluralistic community, and to a certain extent, a racially and culturally pluralistic community, is a resource. It's a resource that says it's possible to be together in community and not to have our differences divide us. It's possible to view the differences among people, the individual stories that we bring, as blessings and not curses. It's a resource that we bring. It's my hope that Unitarian Universalism will be willing to engage in that kind of conversation. That we will be willing to share what we have learned and lived in our congregation. Acknowledging our history, both the noble parts and the parts in which we are complicit with evil in this society. It's my hope that we'll be willing to engage at that level of honesty. And it is my belief that if we're willing to do that, our spiritual life will deepen and that we will be able to have a positive impact on a hurting world which is so much in need of what we have found. So may it be, and amen. Will you rise as willing and able and join us singing hymn number 346? Come sing a song. As you go out from this space, may the love and the nurture that you have found here in these walls go with you. May it nurture you and support you as you walk in the ways of the world. And may you know deep in your heart that that love will be here to greet you when you next return. Amen.
Article 15. Everyone has the right to recognition, everywhere, as a person before the law.
Each one has a power of thought, which cannot be sold or bought, and the conscience every